You know, like in America, it's all about, oh, you have to be yourself, like be who you are, which I totally agree. But then in a lot of these Asian cultures, the unit of the society is family.
Yes.
So I can't just denounce my family and say, hey, this is me. Meanwhile, I'm asking my parents to accept who I am, but then I have to acknowledge that their lives are also going to be changed by this.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Orbital Media Podcast, where we learn about human perspective, culture, and story, one interview at a time. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so we can continue to make episodes in the coming weeks and months. Now, in today's episode, we are going to be talking about gay rights in East Asia. This is a topic that I've been quite interested in myself, and there are a variety of reasons for this based on factors we'll get into in this episode. But we are today joined by Xiang. How close am I with that on the pronunciation?
Yes.
Okay. Xiang, would you like to tell everyone out there, good people, a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Xiang. Xiang Sining, that's my Chinese name. Okay, I went to UCLA Film School. I majored in film production and directing, and then you were producer there.
That's right.
So that's how we met, and then I am gay.
Yes.
And I'm from China.
Yes, and you're from China, which, and so when I was thinking about this topic, I thought you'd be an excellent person to talk to about this. So yeah, basically the concept is all around the world, right, there's a huge variance in gay rights depending on where you live.
Yeah.
And East Asia, I've always been very fascinated by because it's not a place that I think of as being sort of good or bad, so to speak.
Okay.
I've always thought of it in this very sort of amorphous, like neutral way, right? So like if we look at a map of the world and this sort of, I'll just use a color scheme. Let's imagine, you know, blue is good, red is bad, and then we've got gray, which is like, we don't know, right? You know, and I think, okay, regardless of maybe, you know, local opinions, at least from a government perspective, you know, the general Western world, plus, you know, good chunks of Latin America, they'll be blue. Like it's all like, it's gay marriage is legal, you know, all the laws and the policies are good, and they're, you know, they're supportive of people's individual rights and freedoms. Certain parts of the world, you know, throw out a couple names here. I don't know, Saudi Arabia, perhaps.
Yeah.
Maybe bright red. Not
Or
exactly.
Russia, maybe.
Or Russia. Russia's a weird one. You know, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Afghanistan. You know, certain themes maybe here we'll skip over. But you know, these countries bright red, just like horrible places.
Yeah.
In terms of gay rights, I mean, you know, death penalty, prison. You know, social ostracization. You know, just criminal treatment of people. And then there is East Asia, which generally when you look at maps, it's kind of just gray. It's as if there's not really anything particularly positive, but there's not really anything particularly negative. And I always remember like looking at some of these maps and just being very curious. So what does that mean? Like, what does that mean in terms of how the society views it? And so what I'm really curious to kind of learn about from you is sort of your life story, but how you feel this idea of being gay applies to not only you, but other gay men in East Asia. Like, what is that experience like in a way?
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right in a certain way. Like it's a kind of like a gray area. Although like when I thought about it, I thought it may fall more into the red zone.
Okay, well, but I'm curious, like to hear about that. Why?
Because first of all, I only recently learned, only up to after 1997 did the Chinese government actually decriminalized, you know, homosexuality.
Okay.
Like it used to be in the early 90s, I guess people can be thrown into jail if they actually get caught like committing homosexual relationships. So, but then you're right in the way that it's sort of like a gray, it's just not talked about.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to erase that part of the talk. I saw like, for example, right now, I don't think, of course, there's no law supporting gay marriage or anything like that. But then there's also, there's no law anti-discrimination law, like saying that you can discriminate. There's no law about that. But then it's also like it's just in general not talked about in the law within that part at all. I think that's part of the, the government, at least speaking about Chinese government, that's their effort is to try to just like erase this part of the talk at all altogether. So like, let's just not talk about that. So in that sense, I think you're right. It's kind of like a gray.
It's like a gray zone, which is we're not going to actively persecute people, but we don't want anyone in favor of it. We just want to pretend it's just, we're just going to not, we're just not going to talk about it, and we're just going to pretend it's not a thing. And and people will just not acknowledge it in either direction.
But I would definitely say over the past 10 years, especially, since the who came into power, it definitely is getting worse and worse, the situation in China. It's just like there used to be, like I told you before, like there used to be like queer content in films like that were still being made, and then they were able to be shown at least online, because like even if you can broadcast over TV or like film, but then in web series, in web content, it used to be a lot more liberal. Like people can make like boy love themed those like shows, but now since 2015 or so, it just has been censored like completely. Even like online, you just cannot make these type of content anymore.
I guess I'm curious, that idea of how things have changed so much in a short period of time. I guess in your personal life, when you were sort of growing up, and whether however much you want to get into, like when you knew you were gay and how you felt, living in a society, but like what was your personal experience like growing up, being a younger boy, being a teenager, then being in your 20s? And how did you feel that you existed like within China?
Oh, okay. Good question. First of all, I think I figured out I was gay. I am gay pretty early on. Like I would say even in elementary school, I was kind of like a stereotypical like artsy kid. Like I just like to play with girls a lot, like play with not a sporty type of person. I hated all sorts of like team sports like football, soccer.
Or either one. It's YouTube. Plenty of people are tuning in from outside the US.
Like football,
football or
Yeah, so like I was not good with sports, but I like to draw. Like I like to, play with girls, like play with a lot of the things they like to play, things like that. So like, but then at the same time, I didn't know a word about like homosexuality or being gay. But then somehow, I think this is very common to a lot of queer people. You just like instinctively know there's something wrong and then do not talk about that. So like I never actually talked to anybody about it. Like none of my friends or my family knew I was gay. Like for the longest time, I think I first came out to my friend when I was in college. I went to college in China. So, but that I was already like 19 or 20 years old at the time. So, I would say it's overall like a really horrible experience growing up gay. But then later on, I realized, because my boyfriend is from Louisiana, it's sort of similar even in America, in a rural area, in rural America. It's still something, like you just don't know how to deal with it. Like when I was in my teenage years, I just don't know a word about it. I somehow feel, okay, there must be something wrong with me, so I better not let people find out about this.
Did you find, going back to this idea of is it gray or is it red, did you feel that it was like people were sort of they'd actively make like, snarky comments about, people that were gay and stuff, and you felt like, oh, I really can't say anything? Or was it more that idea of it's as if it doesn't exist and nobody's saying anything either way, so you almost feel like almost more confused rather than like under attack, if that makes sense?
I feel definitely, there's a sense that I did feel like threatened a little bit because like, you know, like Chinese society is very heteronormative. Like even for men, you're supposed to behave a certain way, women another way. So like, you know, there's a derogative term for effeminate guys, you know, things like that. And those people tend to be bullied while they're growing up. I mean, like I said, I was never like a really masculine type of person. So I definitely shared my share of like being bullied when I was little, whatever. So I guess that part just make you feel unsafe if you fully come out. And then at the same time, I truly feel there's this sense of like the environment or the society is very traditional. The traditional values are very strong. So like you're supposed to, you know, get married at a certain age and reproduce offspring for your family to continue your family line, all these bullshit. Like it's very, very, you know, solid, upheld over the society. So like, and then also like you just don't see any queer content on TV or anywhere. So meanwhile, people are not getting educated. I don't like to use that word, but like they're just not exposed to this type of thing. So it never actually crossed their mind. There might be people who are living among them who are different than them, you know, so they never thought about that. Which only reinforced the idea that, oh, being homosexual is wrong or like abnormal.
This idea of how things have changed where it was getting better and then it's sort of now it's getting worse again. What was your sense about that? How, you know, because again, it seems as it's gone up and then it's gone kind of back down in, would it be fair to say about the last 20 years or so?
I would say especially the last 10 years. 2013, you know, Xi Jinping came into office in 2013, and then he started to crack down a lot of things. You know, like gay rights is one of them, but I would say censorship overall has gone up a lot, like in the, you know, TV and all that. So right now, not just queer content, but a lot of other content, you can't even make that anymore, you know, so it's definitely bad in a lot of ways, but like I get a sense of like the society overall is kind of like going down a little bit as well. I mean, yeah, that's just my general feeling, and then collected from some other people I talked to in China, like the economy is going down, and then yeah, just overall.
Did you feel that things were getting better in sort of the early 2000s through about, let's say, 2013, 2014, and you mentioned like you came out as gay when you were in college and all of that. Did you feel that there was a change that was going sort of in the like a good direction? You were like, okay, I feel better on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And like, did you have a sense of when did you sort of feel like, oh, a little bit better than?
I feel it's a little bit, how to say this? I didn't feel the society was necessarily going better.
Okay.
Because when I left China in 2009 after I graduated college.
Okay.
So like, of course, I still go back every year to visit family and all that. But then I did not live there for the most of the time.
I got it. Okay.
But then at the time before I left, I didn't get a sense that people start to get more and more aware of this. Yeah. It's still very much like a subculture that living under the radar, all the queer people, LGBT people just living their life, but then try to stay away from the public attention. Okay. I feel at the time the society was very much like that.
Was still so it hadn't really changed.
But then again, certain stuff were allowed to exist. Like I know there were, you know, when you're in college, there are all these societies or like groups. Yeah. So there were groups of, you know, LGBTQ queer groups existing in colleges. And then people were, I remember when I went to college in China, there was quite an influential activist for the AIDS rights and all that. Like she was quite, she gave lectures to our school. She was like going around China, but of course at the time she was already getting canceled from time to time. Right, yeah. Like some universities were banning her, things like that was already happening. But then again, there were more things like that happening at the time. But now I just feel the last 10 years, from what I heard, it's just getting worse and
There's
worse.
absolutely
like
not,
things
yeah.
are getting shut down. Like I know there are some organizations that has existed for 20 years got shut down quite recently.
Yeah. And obviously, China is the main country. That's where you're from. That's where you understand sort of the best. But I also am curious if you feel comfortable speaking about your perception also of gay rights in other parts of East Asia. So let's say Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, maybe even throw Vietnam and Thailand in there if you want to. Obviously, very key with Taiwan, 2019, they legalized gay marriage. It's Taiwan sort of an exception, but a lot of these other places, again, I tend to think of this gray color. I tend to think of this sort of, like we don't we don't know.
You just don't talk about it.
We just don't talk about it. Do you have any sense of like Korea versus Japan and again any other countries?
I feel for me, I'm definitely not an expert to talk about these
totally
countries.
fine.
Like
no
my
worries.
perception of these countries is like we do share this similar culture to a certain degree, and then like from their media, from their TV shows and stuff. So I get this sense that Japan, South Korea, and China, because we're all rooted in this like a Confucius kind of like traditional value, and where the society is set up to run in a certain way. It's very hierarchical. And then Confucius, it's all about like, oh, if you're in a certain position, you have to behave in a certain way. The father has to be like this, mother has to be like that. So like all these countries, we share this value that family is very important, and then you need to recreate, reproduce offspring, all that. So like I can sense that from what I learned, it's quite backward in all these countries, right? In terms of like gay rights and all that. So like Japan is one of the only developed countries who doesn't have much of a gay rights to speak about, like the gay marriage and all that. So I very much feel that it's still not tolerated by the society at large. It only exists as a kind of like a subculture. But then again, like there are a lot of content coming from Japan, especially about the boy love. That's a genre people. But then again, like the major consumer of those content are straight women. It's really interesting.
Right. Yeah, interesting. And do you have thoughts on Taiwan?
I think Taiwan is. I don't have much sense about it, but like it is, like you said, it's like a beacon for progressiveness in Asia, and then they legalize. They're pretty much the very first countries, one of.
It's blue. It's like de jure legal. Again, South Korea, Japan. It's kind of gray. China. It's all kind of gray. I don't know about Thailand and the Philippines are sort of interesting places because like. My sense culturally is they're pretty open about certain things, but I don't think legally there's a whole lot of like, again, there's not interference kind of either way. It's just sort of, we just aren't, people are just going to do their thing, but we don't care from a government perspective either way.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point, because like none of these government has the power of Chinese government. Because they can censor everything. They really have a control in media. Like if they tell a television station to not air certain things, they're not gonna air. Like I know there was one, it was quite recent, it's like 2015 or 16, I believe. There was like a BL, Boy Love, show in China. It already started airing. There are only 15 episodes total. But then after 12 episodes or something, it just canceled.
Like pull the plug,
So the last few, like finale and the last few episodes just never aired on the television station. That's like unheard of from other countries, right? I feel like at least in Japan and South Korea, like the government doesn't have that much interference with.
No, they can't. No, I mean, they would still, if something's on the air, the government can't just call up the station and say, oh yeah, this thing that is on the air, no, you have to take, like, no, they can't do that. I mean, at least I don't think so. I mean, there might, Japan and South Korea, sometimes there are the occasional law that you have, and you're like, oh, that seems a little odd. But it's pretty rare, I think, that there's, generally, I think the rule of thumb is like, whatever you have in a typical Western country, you will have in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. It'll pretty much be the same in all of those countries. Again, there might be occasional something that's like, that seems like that hasn't been updated for a while, but I think it's rare. From a sort of a Western perspective, there is sort of this sense of people don't really know much about core East Asia when it comes to gay rights, but there's a sense of, like kind of Philippines and Thailand, and for other sort of unfortunate implications, I think, but there is a sense of like, people are kind of doing a variety of things there, and like the government just sort of doesn't get it. They just don't care. They're just like, whatever. We don't care either way. There was a really interesting, like this is a big example. Like there was a really interesting YouTube series called Soft White Underbelly. I don't know if you know.
What's it called?
Soft White Underbelly.
Oh, okay.
By Mark Lyda, and he's and he started to do a series where he's in Thailand and he's filming and interviewing people and interviewing sex workers and getting a sense of that. And the feeling I have from how they're describing the world that they live in is that it's very, in terms of daily life, people are kind of doing whatever they want, but there's no like legal representation in any direction for people. It's just like, it's pretty conventional with if you're filling out forms, but daily life, do whatever you want. We don't really care. But again, those are those countries kind of specifically,
Yeah, pretty much like that. Like in China, right? I can still there are still gay bars in Beijing or Shanghai. Maybe not in my hometown. But then you can still go. I don't feel like physically in danger or anything being gay. It's just like the pressure from people, how people see you, how people look at you. People still think that's an abnormal thing. But then I would never. I don't have to worry about being attacked or like being thrown into jail, being killed or something like that.
It's not like if you were in like Iran, or like Russia or something, where it's like
If I visit Saudi Arabia, I'm not gonna kiss my boyfriend.
Right. Yeah. No. Exactly. That's I'll deal with Saudi Arabia in a different episode. Well, I think we were talking a little bit earlier, where you almost likened it to, you said, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, that like being gay in China when I go back and visit is the same way that I could imagine someone in like a fairly red U.S. state might feel, where it's like I don't feel physically in danger necessarily, but I do feel like not super wanted if I'm around.
Yeah, like it was super interesting because my boyfriend is from Louisiana, so I've been going back to his hometown for every Christmas for the past 3 Christmases. Like when we go back there, we're pretty much living in the closet. Like we pretend I'm just his best friend or roommate, but then I'm like, don't you family think like this roommate? Why does this roommate come to Christmas?
This roommate comes to a lot of Christmases.
I know. He comes a lot. So, but then very much the same. And then this year, because we might talk about my short film later, but because it was getting distributed online, so his father was afraid that, now every relative might see that. So he told all the relatives that we're actually a couple, and then they seem to be fine with it. But then we were just like living in the closet for nothing for the past few years.
The U.S. is interesting because I'm even thinking about again, I'm not gay. I'm a straight, I'm a straight man. But still growing up, I do remember even in a reasonably affluent suburb, like in the early 2000s, like there was a fair amount of just like, gay was basically like an insult that boys would throw around to each other. But there seemed to be a very major shift. And again, I was not in like some super like rural red state area. I was in sort of a pretty, I'd say, politically borderline like suburban environment.
Oh, where are you from?
I grew up in Westchester, so like in New York, like a New York City suburb basically. But like that was pretty common still growing up in a suburb like that. And it did really seem, I think, and this is true, I think, of the country in general, that it was over it was really the early 2000s into the 2010s where there was this really massive shift in, I think, people starting to be kind of fine with it. And your point actually about Patrick like telling the relatives and the relatives all being like, oh yeah, like whatever, that's fine. Like we don't really care. Is an interesting one that actually does seem to line up a lot with, I think, the general real shift that happened with not everywhere in the U.S., but like overwhelmingly like the large percentage of the U.S. population. I mean, the figures suggest it's like high 60s to about 70% of the country is like in favor of gay marriage and like gay rights in general and stuff, which again, even in the early 2000s was I think under 50%. It was like, 40 something people were like okay with it, but most people were like no.
I think I was reading about Taiwan. I think it's similar. Like they tried to, referendum whatever, like 10, 20 years ago, whatever.
Like early 2000s.
And then it failed, right? But then like 10 years later, surprisingly, it just passed. Like I guess the general public's opinion can just change within a decade like that.
Well, I mean, it seems to be sort of this idea of, which, again, this is, I'm not going to get into the extreme elements of culture war stuff, but stay very much in the mainstream of what happened, which is where if the approach was in the gay rights movement, you're trying to portray your sameness to everyone else, and you say, look, we're just regular people, we're just like you, that once, the stories went, once like a relative or a family, or a friend or whatever came out and said, oh, actually, by the way, I'm gay, that once people knew someone who seemed like kind of just a normal person in their life, that was a major effect in changing people's perception to it being like, oh, actually, I guess it's not a problem.
I think interestingly, like you said, I think early on, even the movies about gay people and all that, it was focusing on that, right? A lot of the movies were trying to show that, oh, look, gay people are just like you, just the same. I think that's early on, the movement's focus was on that, just to try to fight for acceptance.
That seems to be a major factor. And again, like the case with you and with your boyfriend, like that checks out basically, right? Where the view is like, this is a major problem, people aren't going to accept me, and then you kind of tell everyone, and they're like, yeah, okay, that's fine. And if you want to switch gears actually and talk about. If you want to talk about Foreign Uncle.
Oh, sure.
Because it does relate, So first of all, for people out there who don't know, and assuming they don't, what is Foreign Uncle?
Foreign Uncle is this short film I made at UCLA, which was my thesis film. At the time, I was around 32. Okay, so at the time, I really was thinking about coming out to my family. And then, so eventually I did.
And they're in China.
They're all
live in China. They all live there.
So eventually I did, and it was very traumatic, the whole experience. So I wanted to make a movie about that experience. So in the end, I decided to make with my family members, most of them playing themselves. And then the film focused on my boyfriend, who is white and American. And then, so basically the story focused on his relationship with my 7-year-old nephew, who's Chinese, of course. And then, so it just shows that, like at first the family was all welcoming and loving Patrick. But then after the relationship of Patrick and me were revealed, oh, we're a homosexual couple. And then my family's attitude kind of changed, except for my nephew, who doesn't care if this foreign uncle is gay or not. That's the story.
Yeah, exactly. And he's, and I've seen the film, and I told you, like, I think it's a great film. It's a really, really good film. It's in the New Yorker, right? Is where people can find it. So like, and we'll go over kind of links
Google
and stuff.
Foreign Uncle New Yorker.
Yeah, Foreign Uncle New Yorker. You can watch it. Highly recommend it. It's a really good film.
Oh, thank you.
Like I remember in the film, right, the nephew, because he's like 7, right? He sort of he doesn't quite have a frame of reference for this kind of stuff. But in terms of reality, right, how did that play out for you and your family when you finally came out as gay to them?
Oh, it was pretty volatile for a while. Like, I actually came out to my parents via video chat. which thinking back now might be a better choice because if I don't want to talk to them anymore, I can just hang up and then we don't have to talk for a little while. But then, so I was in America at the time, so I told them via video chat, and then it was really, really bad. And then my parents, again, that's when I come to think about like, you know, queer content is really important actually to educate the public. Because they were truly ignorant about the subject. Like they still think like, oh, there must be something wrong with you. Maybe like psychotherapy could change, you know, like conversion therapy, that sort of thing. I was like, I cannot believe that came out of their mouth. And then like in the 2020s, and then they are still thinking that way. But then again, I came to realize, okay, I can't really, you know, like blame them because considering the environment they were living in, it's really not their fault or they didn't have other choice. So eventually we sort of like, you know, start talking again, and then my cousin's family. So basically Nao's family, Nao's my cousin's son.
Okay, and that's the nephew.
That's the nephew.
Now it's the nephew. Okay, yeah.
So their family sort of like was the in between me and my parents a little bit.
So that family was slightly more okay with it, and they were okay to talk to you and stuff, and so they'd have to relay messages kind of back and forth.
Yeah.
And then eventually, though, you did end up back on speaking terms with your parents.
Yes,
which is good.
And when I was making the movie, which was about like a few months to a half year after it came out, and like I went to my cousin's city, and my parents actually eventually went to that city to help me with the film.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Then actually, the point about cities, I'm also curious about because. So in the U.S., right, not only historically, but even to a degree, I think definitely now, there's a big range of like, it kind of depends where you go in terms of what's the general culture and its acceptance of being gay or not. Do you find that, from how much you've traveled around China, to still be the case in China? Or is it like, it's more even in terms of it's mostly just people are not a fan or they don't talk about it?
Actually, interesting. There is one region in China which is very gay. Like it's called the gay capital of China. It's called Chengdu, and it's actually a very fun city to travel to. The food is great. Chengdu is in Sichuan province. So like their food is mostly Sichuan cuisine, which is known for their spices and, you know, spicy food and hot pot. There's a lot of hot pot. So it's really fun to actually travel there. They're competing with Bangkok to be the travel destination of Asia.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would say actually that city has a really high population of gays.
Okay.
I actually don't know why. I mean,
yeah, it's a very specific place. Like,
yeah, I guess it's just more liberal, a little bit more liberal compared to other Chinese cities. So like gay people or queer people feel comfortable being queer in public. And then I went there once or twice. It was really fun. Like the food is great. There are a lot of gay bars, and then you come visit.
Yeah, but in terms of, you know, like the big, even like the big coastal cities, you know, or and Beijing's not coastal, but it's still a, you know, big, you know, it's not super inland. It's not, you know, you know, but do you still feel that, let's say, if you were in Beijing versus if you went into like, I don't know how developed Anhui is as the whole province, but like there are areas where you're not going to be in a big city, right? Like, was your feeling, okay, if I'm in a small town, it's like a problem, but if I'm in a big city, it's less of a problem? Or is the sense, kind of no matter where I am, the general feeling is like you're not really wanted?
I feel that's general because of the culture, because Chinese culture truly is very, what is that word?
Homogenous?
Homogenous, yes, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
It's like everybody just try to adhere to the same rules. Like even with it, like being a younger person, if you don't get married by the age of 30, you're considered a freak or like a social pariah. In China, like no matter what your sexual orientation is.
Right. No,
like,
no, that's a whole thing.
There are a lot of like single women.
A lot of single women in their 30s,
They are being they have to deal with such like pressure from their family and then like shaming and all that. So like I would say very much, if you're a gay person and you plan on staying gay for the rest of your life, and then don't get married, because a lot of gay people, they end up getting married in China, and then like they cause bigger problems for their their wives, because there's actually a term for those wives. It's called 同妻, basically means wives of homos.
Okay.
Yes. So like that's actually a problem. But then that's what a lot of people end up doing, is they try to settle down and get married.
I mean, you certainly had plenty of that, I think, in the U.S. in like the 20th century, and like I think about like the 50s and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's the archetypical, like the closet gay guy, where everyone kind of knows like he's probably gay, but he's like, oh no, I've got a wife, and like we just don't have any kids for any no particular reason. But that idea of what's the term? It's I think, aren't they called leftover women? The women who
剩女.
who don't get married, and like even if you're 32 or something.
Like it used to be, you were gonna be called that even when you were 28.
Right.
Not
Yeah,
married. I was
yeah.
like, wow, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, which especially with the birth situation is not ideal. It is interesting to see sort of. I guess you said the level of homogeneity, whether you're in a big city or in the countryside, which maybe was more of the case in the U.S., but especially for at least decades now, there's such a massive division between if you're in a city environment versus if you're in a countryside. It's almost like night and day in certain
But
cultural
I would say,
factors.
as a queer person, if you live in one of those smaller cities, it's horrible.
Yeah.
Like, where do you meet people? Where do you meet other queer people? At least if you live in one of the bigger cities, you can find your community. So like, I guess you can have a better life that way. But then again, no matter where you live, you have to face this societal pressure of getting into a relationship, starting a family, all that. Yeah.
What was your feeling once you were in the U.S. and you're living in California? And so aside from, let's say, your family and your boyfriend Patrick's family, what was your feeling about daily life in the 2010s in a Western country? Was it like, oh, there's a massive difference, or there's still a sense of like, no, I still have to be kind of careful here and there, and like, what was that sort of like from your perspective?
Ooh, interesting. I would say it's definitely not like a switch, like all of a sudden life's better. Because when I first came here, I was, at the time just, when you migrate to another country, it's always difficult because I couldn't fit in here. At first, I was for the first couple of years, I was basically only hanging out with all the other Chinese immigrants, because when I got to my first school, I studied electrical engineer before switching to film. So at the time, like in that school, there are a lot of like Asian students, Chinese students.
This is a school in the U.S.
Yeah, in the U.S. I got my first master's degree in electrical engineering.
Nice.
I went to UC San Diego. So at the time, I was hanging out mostly with my classmates who are mostly Chinese. And then after that, I worked in Silicon Valley, who I was also hanging out with. There are so many Chinese people there. So I was very much still rooted in my own culture in a way. And interestingly, it's only after I started at UCLA, all of a sudden I was confronted with all these American culture.
Interesting. Okay.
So
interesting.
People. Because like I would say before that, yes, of course I have to deal with work and all my coworkers, but again, most of them are Asians or like Middle Eastern people, interestingly. Like people from these countries love to study engineering.
Yes, yeah. Did you find even also with, you mentioned a lot of other Chinese people, that did this include Chinese American, or mostly was it a lot of like direct Chinese immigrants? English is not their first language.
I would say both. Like later on when I was working,
mix,
there are
probably,
a lot of like Asian Americans.
Sure.
But then I do feel within the Asian immigrant communities, it's still very much, like you said, it's a little bit gray. Like these people probably don't even think about that much. And then like here, although there are a lot of things they can choose to watch or whatever, but then they probably will veer away from all the queer. They're not gonna go see what's that movie?
Call Me by Your Name.
Yeah, Call Me by Your
in the
Name.
theater. Yeah.
Yes. Actually, interestingly, speaking of that, it was, although it won Oscar that year,
it won
right?
some stuff. Yeah.
It was banned in China. Like it was pulled from theaters in China.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a good litmus test, right? To see like if that movie plays in Japan, if it plays in South Korea, it plays in Taiwan, right? But it's like, oh, it's banned in China.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see like, well, what countries is that movie banned in? And that's a good, like, I would bet Malaysia, I'm sure it was banned in Malaysia, for example. You know, that's another country which is, you know, in my honest opinion, not exactly stellar on that. On the subject of, you know, gay rights, human rights. Yeah, for sort of a long time, I mean, in the US, even going back to like the 80s, 90s, you still had very much like certain cities where it's kind of fine, but then outside of it, it's sort of not. But yeah, not so much quite that homogeneity the way you describe it in China.
Yeah.
When you talk to people who are overseas Chinese in the US, like, do you still just really not bring the subject up with them? Or like, do you do that more a bit now? And what's their reaction like?
Interesting. So like I only kind of like publicly came out after film school. So but it's not like a big announcement. Hey, I'm gay on social media or whatever. I just like, you know, like
so some people it is.
Yeah, some people do that, but then I never did. But then I just don't pretend I'm not gay anymore.
Right.
I mean, if I go out with my boyfriend and then if we take a photo, I'm gonna post about that, you know? Right. So like probably all my friends, although maybe I didn't tell them in person, hey, I'm gay, but then my friends from before, who still are in Silicon Valley, they probably learned over the past few years, I assume.
Yeah, I mean,
so,
you know, something they
so it's kind of like that way. So
okay.
I came out and then now I'm just, you know, out because of the New Yorker thing.
Right.
So, but then which turned out like my parents really didn't want that to happen because like I know some people who are from my hometown and then they might tell their parents who are my mom's friends. So like there's always concern that my parents always have that kind of concern that, oh, what if like so-and-so find out you're gay? I'm like, I don't even know who they are. Like my life is so far away from them. Why do I care? But then they're like, we still need to care. So it's that kind of like unfortunate situation, which I also don't see a way to solve that. I think that's what one thing I want to talk about maybe is, in America, it's all about, oh, you have to be yourself, like be who you are, which I totally agree. But then in a lot of these Asian cultures, the unit of the society is family. So I can't just denounce my family and say, hey, this is me. Meanwhile, I'm asking my parents to accept who I am, but then I have to acknowledge that their lives are also going to be changed by this.
Yeah, it does change the calculus when you can just like do your own thing and you're just living your own life.
Yeah, exactly. I can live my life with no problem in California, but what about my parents? Like they do have to face all the other, maybe they eventually will face more discrimination than I actually do, right? Because what if like their friends and neighbors, like you said, or start to treat them differently? Yeah, I have to think about that. There's no easy way out. It's not like that simple as like a slogan, be who you are. Yeah.
And I think there is, that idea of things aren't just going to change overnight, and you have to be realistic about what's the environments. Yeah. Like, I'm curious, so aside from, again, you mentioned a lot of other Chinese students in the program and, from earlier time in college, and you're like, I don't know what they think. Maybe they just like, they must know now, but it's not like I talk to them. Have you subsequently met other people, other gay men from East Asian countries, or either here, and like compared notes on like what it's like where they were growing up or anything like that?
I did. Like in Silicon Valley, there were a group of gay men like hanging out, like sort of like a community. So I met many people, and then one topic often people would talk about among gay East Asian people is like, oh, are you out? Or do you ever plan on coming out to your family? What's your futures like? Because seriously, a lot of men still, they either don't think about that or they still plan on marrying someone in the future just to satisfy their family.
Marrying a woman.
Yeah,
and
marrying
like,
a woman and maybe have a kid.
Maybe have a kid, yeah.
Yeah, so like that's very much, I mean, unfortunately that depends on where the person is from. Like if they're from smaller places or like an even rural place or like countryside, there's a higher chance they might eventually give in to this societal pressure. But then I know also people from Shanghai, their family is maybe not fine, but like they're never gonna go down that route, you know?
Yeah, Shanghai sort of, again, I've never been to China, but I mean, certainly people I know from Shanghai, I'm a little familiar with the city compared to at least other parts of East Asia. And my gut feeling would have been if there was any part of China where it was gonna be a bit more open, a bit more kind of like, we're not saying we're like 2 thumbs up happy about it, but at least we'll sort of tolerate it. I would have imagined somewhere like Shanghai, you're gonna find more of that.
Yes. So definitely, I would say Shanghai. Not Beijing.
Yeah, not Beijing.
Although Beijing is also might be a bigger city in terms of like population and all that, but then because Beijing is the capital, so it's very heavily controlled. Like this time, I was surprised. I just went back to China like in June. I was surprised how strictly controlled in Beijing. Even if you want to buy a subway ticket, you need to scan your ID card. So like they can trace whoever is buying ticket, going where, all that. Like they don't do that in Shanghai, but then they do that in Beijing.
Okay, That's, I mean, not to like switch gears here and get off the subject of gears and now talk about race in China.
If I'm not
No. I actually that's the thing that I find very interesting. I don't need to just be like, this is an interview. We have to stay on track here. Like I do like going in like an organic direction and just because I'm curious to learn about this stuff. That there's always the question that I have of how standardized are these sort of protocols in different parts of China? And going back to the idea of, the sense is it's generally going to be very standardized. Whatever they have in one place, they've rolled it out everywhere else. But that may not always be the case. You mentioned like Beijing, they're going to have extreme protocols. Shanghai, maybe not so much.
For sure. It's not. Interestingly, actually, because I traveled a little bit in the US, like we did the road trip from here to Louisiana a couple of times. So like we've seen at least the states on the route, right? And I've been to New York. And I would say, surprisingly, a lot of the places in America feels more homogenized because of they're all like capitalism. Like when like whenever, whichever small town you visit, it's always the same stores. Like there's a McDonald's, like a Chick-fil-A, whatever. It kind of like start to blend in together. It feels like the same. At least because China is still developing. So when you visit different parts, sometimes I feel, oh, am I in a different country now? Because like you don't see familiar big brand, and then people are speaking a different dialect, which you couldn't understand. So I would definitely say that China is still very much region dependent.
Yes. I'm also just curious to learn about the different regions of China and how they are distinct from one another. Because again, like there's that sense of, certainly compared to, I always think of India, China's more homogenous in a lot of cultural ways, but also it's not as homogenous as you might think. And there are notable differences in regional dialects and cultural differences and things. And so it's curious to learn about that. The history of gay rights and gay people in East Asia, and especially as it might relate to something like Confucianism, is that something you're like, I have thoughts on, or is it more like, I don't?
Maybe just about Chinese.
That's fine. Yeah, sure. If we want to just limit it to China, we won't talk about Japan or Korea. That's fine. But like a little bit of the historical context.
Yeah, because very interesting. China has seems like has no problem with homosexuality for quite some time.
Yeah, for a long time.
And then I remember learning about this. There's this poet called Xiang who lived in around 300 BC, I would say.
So this is like pre-Han Dynasty.
Yeah, pre-Han, and it's called the Warring States.
Oh, it's Warring States period. Yeah, this is pre-imperial China.
So he's a very famous poet. And then he eventually, his country was getting invaded, and he thinks his country is not, it's gonna give in.
Gonna get
so
conquered,
he eventually committed suicide by throwing himself into a river. And then apparently he was so loved by the people, and then people were trying to retrieve his body, but then couldn't find his body. So people start throwing 粽子, which is like a rice ball wrapped in these leaves, into the river, so the fish would not eat his body. That's how people loved him. And then which turned into a festival now. It's called the 端午 Festival, where we eat 粽子to this day. But then he himself, like I remember reading his poem, he would describe himself as the beauty. And he is quite in love with the emperor he's serving. And then there would be lines saying that, oh, all these women are jealous of my beautiful eyebrow or something. But of course, when I was learning those lines in school, they were saying that, oh, he's using this metaphor as saying that all the other bad people are attracted.
Yeah,
I was
like,
okay,
yeah, or
he's
not,
obviously
like,
talking about how beautiful he is.
Yeah.
So he's quite, in my mind, I mean, I actually read about this. Okay, there were academic people who actually came out and stated he is gay.
Sure. Yeah.
He's obviously gay. He loves to wear beautiful clothes, and he even described that he always liked to wear weird clothes, like different clothes since he was young. I was like, this is a queer person.
Yeah.
But of course, in China now, they're trying to, describe him as like he's using all these writing metaphor. Blah, blah, blah. But then that's an example of like homosexuality actually exists for quite some time. And it was quite normal for like an emperor to have, they have concubine, but they also have male lovers. So in history, like I think for the longest time, it was quite accepted.
It seems to be that case. And I've been curious about that because you don't have any of the monotheism stuff. You don't have any of the between Christianity, Islam, get on that one, and even like Judaism, the general sense is like generally when you've got this religion and everyone's like, this is bad, don't do it, it has a big effect on how that culture then treats things. But, again, my sense with East Asia is you got Confucianism, you got Buddhism, you've got in Japan, you've got Shinto, but I'm not super clear that there are ever sections where they're like, this is sort of not okay. So it results in a different way in which the society goes. But of course, and your point about even when you were growing up is interesting, which is like, but people are still people, and like guys who are a bit more aggressive and a bit more manly, like they're still gonna like bully people that they think are like effeminate, and you're like, that's not gonna change, and so then we get back to this point of, well, it's sort of just gray then. It's like it's just a thing that people will do, and like.
But then this is something it came up when I was reading it. I was You're absolutely right, because I think Asian culture, East Asian countries at least, we don't have this burden with religion. Like sin, this is like in some literature saying it's sinful. We never have as culture, we never had that kind of like burden to fight through. It's just like you said, Confucianism, which is like defining the society to be run in a certain way, which is prevalent in East Asian countries, but still it's never a big deal until quite recently, until the last 200 years or so, or maybe 100 years. And then from my reading, actually it's interesting, it was said it was introduced by the Western culture.
Yeah, it's so funny how that sort of happened, because exactly, you get these sort of, I think there are certain parts of the world where the sort of the Westerners, they did all this, like I think it's frankly really overstated. There are parts of the world where it's been objectively horrible, forever. But yeah, I think in a couple cases that is actually a fair argument to make against sort of like some of the Western imperialism, where like up until Westerners show up with Christianity, and this is often in like the 1800s, early 1900s, where even in the West, sort of, shall we say, anti-homosexuality is even itself at reasonably high levels. Because it's also fluctuated in the West too. It's not always just been like, it was always bad. It's kind of gone, sort of up and down. But 1800s, especially early 19, it's like, it's not good in the West too. So
I would say during the medieval time, it was definitely quite liberal in China, in the Eastern culture, compared to the European.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
All that.
For sure.
And then I was reading something about like during the Qing dynasty, so apparently all the priests that came here, like all the missionaries, they were quite abhorred by the sexual norms of China. Apparently people are really focusing on pleasure or like whatever bring them pleasure, but apparently that's a big deal for all the religious people.
Especially, I'd say Christianity especially. Christianity is sort of and then there are things about Christianity I think that are good in how a society is developed, but yes, I think compared to a lot of other Christianity, there's sort of this like, we're not worthy, we're terrible people, we're sinful, like we shouldn't be enjoying ourselves, we should just be kind of like sad and thinking about God and kind of depressed, and the Catholic guilt and all of that idea. And so you definitely get that in Christianity. But that's interesting that this idea that a lot of the Western influence that then transmits into like anti-gay sentiment in then East Asian countries, that lines up very much with this idea of
But I would definitely say from the Qing dynasty, which is the last dynasty, and then since then the societal norms come like bigger and bigger, like the society was moving to a more conservative way, like more sedimented in a way. A lot of like societal roles has to be this way.
And it is interesting how even though it's still not a religious component, it's sort of, they've almost just adopted it as it's just a cultural norm. Culturally, previously, we were fine with it. Now, culturally, we're against it. It's not like a religion's changed that. It's just, again, there maybe was this external force from like Westerners who were against it. Now, ironically, the Westerners are all for it, and now we're against it. And so it's sort of like, it's interesting how this stuff flip-flops over like a couple hundred years.
But during the, right after 1949, where the Communist Party took over the country. So after that, there was definitely a period under Mao Zedong leadership. It was definitely not accepted. It was kind of probably similar to how gay people are being treated in Middle Eastern countries.
Which is horrific.
You can literally be prosecuted,
like killed
for it.
It's sort of interesting how that stuff has changed. I'm also for the West. I'm also not, because the stereotype in the West is you got Greece and Rome, and it's pretty much you'd be similar to China. It's like everything's like fine. Christianity is the big change in that factor. What I'm not so clear on though is how even in the West during the Middle Ages through the last 1,000 years it's changed, because I think it has fluctuated in terms of like when it was socially acceptable versus not, or where like kind of like with East Asia, there's sort of like people just kind of turn a blind eye, like we kind of know what's going on, but we'll just versus periods where it's like very actively enforces like this is not acceptable. And again, my general sense is sort of during kind of the the high point of imperialism, like 1800s, early to mid 20th century, is when it's very like people are very like anti-gay, and I'm thinking about even in the UK with like Alan Turing, right, where he's like, it's still technically, again, there was never ever like death penalty, but it was like, we would like send you to prison or something, and
he was chemically
castrated, and that's 1940s. That's in the 40s where that's happening. It's World War II. So that's not that long ago. So no, it seems that there's been a very massive change in Western countries, really in the like two or three generations, the 60s onwards, basically. But that hasn't changed, even in East Asia, even if there's again, except for Taiwan, and again, Japan, South Korea, kind of, we don't know. Even though it's not religiously dictated, it's more just like a cultural norm.
I feel, it's really interesting. theoretically, these Eastern countries shouldn't have that much of a problem to break through because they don't have this burden of religion.
There's not a religious element. It's it's sort of just, well, that's just what you do.
Yeah. But then still, I guess right now, just the social norms are just like have such a powerful grasp on people. Like, people find it hard to move past that.
Yeah, well, and going back, and then, if you do have a Confucian society, like the concept of a social norm itself is then treated very, very seriously. You're like, well, that is how the society runs. We don't question that. Even if it's not a religion, it's still this kind of... Yeah, I mean, Confucianism is a very interesting topic.
I also find it interesting in the past 10 years, I definitely see like an uprising of like these other conservative values, like a women need to behave a certain way in a household, like a wife should cook or something like that. There's like subtle change in the social, like, I don't know, social norms, like people just think that's normal again. Like back in the Mao time, their slogan was "Women and men are the same. Women
it's like
can drive a tank."
What is it? Like women hold up half the earth, right?
Exactly.
What was the term? It was the exactly.
They're like, women can hold up half of the sky.
That's right. The sky. Yes,
they're
thank you.
totally equal.
Right.
But now there's this new push for like a more conservative family value. I can sense from the TV shows and all that. Like it's coming back in the past 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, and that's again, I think one thing about the past, but not only on the subject of gay rights, but also on the subject of like women's rights. I find with the past, both in the West, ancient Greece and Rome, but also China, is people will very quickly jump to this conclusion of, oh, well, it wasn't everything great because like you had gay rights and it wasn't a problem and stuff. Often the trade-off, though, is you had horrible rights for women in these societies. And sort of, there's the interesting line of thought, I don't know if you have opinions on this, of, gay men who are very misogynistic against women. That's a theme that you often see, at least from my readings, of like a lot of ancient Greece and Rome. That shows up a lot. This idea of men who are basically like so into being guys, they're like, we just hate women and we also sleep with other guys because that's just our thing. Seems to be a theme you see in certain aspects of, again, elements of Greece and Rome. It's still debated. There's some people who say, no, we're overstating, how gay people were back then. It's muddied the further back you get in like, how do we interpret stuff? But I mean, like my sense of China is the status of women not exactly great, but during imperial periods where kind of general homosexual relationships between men not super looked down on in any way. But it's not always a case of just, oh, wasn't it all great? It's like it gets confused, it gets dicey, dicey. A couple of other, I think, European monarchs in the like medieval early modern period where they were pretty much census they were gay, and they also hated women, which is which again, like it's an interesting thing from a modern perspective because we associate like, oh, if you're in the gay rights movement, you are for oppressed and underrepresented people. But that's an aspect I think that often isn't talked about, which is like you could be a gay man in a very high position of power and you actually are very much just like, nope, we just want to make it all men.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just think people would always discriminate against another group.
Yeah.
Like some people said that if it's not about race or gender, sexuality is going to be about like looks or heights or whatever.
Yeah. Or just, I mean, the big one I think is just wealth
or class. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's the one that again people don't appreciate how insane the idea of class was in the past. Of like, oh, you're from this social class, even if you're like educated and you've got you work your way up. Oh yeah, but you're from this social class. Like we don't care. Like don't talk to us. Which that's something we don't have to deal with. But that was a huge thing back in the past. They're very different times, and the people are clearly us. But this idea of you just grow up in the culture you're used to and you just take that as a given that like that's what happens. Yeah, I don't know. How do you, I mean, do you have any predictions, whether it's, again, just for China or you know, non-China East Asia, any, I don't know, thoughts or predictions or trends that you see taking place? You mentioned this sort of growing reactionary conservatism in China. But
for China.
Yeah, for China. But like, I don't know, do you see any other like trends? And
honestly, my view for Chinese society as a whole is quite pessimistic.
Yeah, for me it is also
so
true.
like
by the way,
I don't know. I just don't know. Like also like this is the other thing weird about China. Like as a normal person, I don't know anything going on within the Communist Party.
Right.
So when it comes to political, I honestly I don't know. I don't know what's going on there, and then I don't know where's the direction of the country is going to. Apparently, right now it's really bad. I mean, just the economy alone. I think the unemployment rate is through the roof right now. And then even like my parents living in China, they can sense it. They can feel like people are struggling. Like my friends, I have some friends went back to China from here during the pandemic. And then now some of them are like unemployed, they lost their job during the last, I just don't know. Like overall, I think the society is not doing great. So I think gay right might be a very low on their
it's very low on the
list.
priority list. Yeah, yes. I think that's right. Yeah. No, unfortunately, I think that's the case in a lot of places, and I feel a sense of certain pessimism in the U.S. too. I think. I mean, I don't think it's as bad, certainly, but there is also a general sense of, I think, like a pessimism, and like things are going to be worse tomorrow, and things are not like going in the right direction, and whatever way we see that, which is too bad. But this stuff happens in very large waves. But yeah, I mean, your point about that, like a topic that's already not on the table for discussion is going to be low priority when it comes to other stuff.
Yeah, another thing I find it interesting is like the Chinese government were shutting down some like pride protests, things like that. But then people are commenting like the Chinese government don't really care about gay pride. They just don't want any sort of like organization or protest. They don't care. They're not shutting down your NGO because it's a gay queer NGO. They're shutting down because it's still an NGO. They just don't want any sort of like a organized kind of like a grassroots movement going on.
And that was, I remember, I think this was going back again, probably what we would have called the high point of sort of, I don't even want to say like gay acceptance in China, but where there wasn't active crackdowns on like expression, where I think this was, maybe like 2013, 2014, where like I saw in the article and they were like, oh, they're having like a gay pride parade in like a city in China. And it's like, okay, that just happened, like fine. But this point of it's the threat to the authority, not, why are there gay people? Like, that's not what's bothering people. Exactly. That's not what's bothering the government. Versus in certain, like in a Muslim majority country, it's like, oh, they're gay people. That's what we, hate.
It's very interesting how Chinese government view gay people.
Again, it gets back to, just sort of that idea of it's just utter apathy of just, it's just about the control of the population. And whether people are gay or not, sort of, it's like, we don't really like it, but we're not gonna, that's not what we see as the threat.
And then reinforcing the norm.
Yes,
exactly.
Normal.
So whatever is considered abnormal is gonna get shut down.
It's gonna get shut down, regardless of whether that means something's gay or it means something's like pro-democracy or something.
Like single mom wanting to have like, what's that called? Like a child of their own, like a single mom with the
surrogate. Like you mean like
like just inseminate.
Artificial insemination.
Even that is getting shut down.
Right.
So they just don't want anything that's not adhering to the core family value and all that.
The value is what they want. It's a totally separate one from, I think, a lot of how people in Western countries, or even like, even to a degree, Middle Eastern countries, where again you have that whole religion element, or that whole like binary of like, why are countries doing things? And it's like, they're doing things that might look similar, but they're doing it for fundamentally different reasons.
Exactly. Yeah.
That I think talked about. Yeah. I mean, we've had a good discussion.
I think we had a really good talk. But I just want to bring this up. Like, have you ever read that book, *Sapien* by? I forgot the author's name.
No,
it's a really great book. It's like a kind of like a really short overview of the history of all human beings. But what I really like about that is like, like we're ending on a pessimistic note. But then that book, I remember it basically said, okay, although wherever you see there are a lot of problems, but overall, if you see human history over thousands or tens of thousands of years, it's still going.
It's getting better.
Good.
It's
still
getting better.
Yes, At least nowadays, we live in any society. Even in a warring state, you still have like a lower death rate than like let's say people who were born in the medieval time.
Oh, completely.
We've
in terms of death, we've never been living in a safer and more prosperous time in history. Ever.
And just overall, you're not hungry all the time.
Yes.
The famine.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
So
overall, things are better than they've ever been.
Yes.
I think it's a sense of, because things are now, they're maybe flatlining at this high level of consumption, but they're not increasing for average people. Comparatively, we feel that that's bad versus in, certainly Western countries, but even more, in, let's say, developing countries, when there's a feeling that things will be better tomorrow, it gives you just this, better mental state. Whereas if the sense is, things will just continue, or maybe they'll go down slightly. Even if you're at this very high level, you view that as like, oh, well, that's terrible. Because you're so used to having things be amazing for you that even the slight downturn is like, this is unacceptable. I wonder if that's part. But in terms of if we just get that, we just step away from our, being in our own heads and just think, well, things are still great. That is better than than so many other alternatives. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. We've mentioned obviously For an Uncle, but if anyone wants to check it out, they can find it on the New Yorker. We'll put the link down below. You were done with the festival circuit, right?
Pretty much done. Right. There's still a few festivals.
There are a few festivals. Okay. But
you can view it.
We'll put we'll put the New Yorker article in so you can view it. We highly recommend you check it out. It's a great film.
Thank you.
It's very funny and it's very heartwarming, I think, in equal measure. It's it's not sort of like pretentious of how like artistic it is. It's just a really nice film.
Thank you.
So please check it out. Thank you so much if you made it this far watching. If you haven't already subscribed, like the video.
Make sure subscribe.
Yes, thank you. And it helps us make more content in the coming weeks and months. And we'll see you next time.